The Dweller in Darkness by August Derleth was published in Weird Tales of November 1944. We'll start our program with an H.P. Lovecraft quote. Searchers after horror haunt strange places. Searchers after horror haunt strange far places. For them are the catacombs of Ptolemus and the carven mausolea of the nightmare countries. They climb to the moonlit towers of ruined Rhine castles and falter down black cobwebbed steps beneath the scattered stones of forgotten cities in Asia. The haunted wood and the desolate mountain are their shrines, and they linger around the sinister monoliths on uninhabited islands. But the true epicenter in the terrible, to whom a new thrill of unutterable ghastliness is the chief end and justification of existence, esteems most of all the ancient and lonely farmhouses of backwoods regions, for there are dark elements of strength, solitude, grotesqueness, and ignorance combined to form the perfection of the hideous. Until recently, if a traveler in north-central Wisconsin took the left fork at the junction of the Brule River Highway and the Chequamegon Pike on the way to Bashapaho, he would find himself in country so primitive that it would seem remote from all human contact. If he drove on along the little-used road, he might in time pass a few tumble-down shacks where presumably people had once lived, and which have long ago been taken back by the encroaching forest. It is not desolate country, but an area thick with growth, and over all its expanse there persists an intangible aura of the sinister, a kind of ominous oppression of the spirit, quickly manifest to even the most casual traveler, for the road he has taken becomes ever more and more difficult to travel, and is evidently lost just short of a deserted lodge, built on the edge of a clear blue lake, around which century-old trees brood eternally, a country where the only sounds are the cries of the owls, the whippoorwills, and the eerie loons at night, and the wind's voice in the trees, but is it always the wind's voice in the trees? And who can say whether the snapped twig is a sign of an animal passing, or something more, some other creature beyond man's ken. For the forest surroundings, the abandoned lodge at Rick Lake had a curious reputation long before I myself knew it, a reputation which transcended similar stories about similar primeval places. There were odd rumors about something that dwelt in the depths of the forest darkness, by no means the conventional wild whisperings of ghosts, of something half animal, half man, fearsomely spoken of by such natives as inhabited the edges of that region, and referred to only by stubborn head-shakings among the Indians who occasionally came out of that country and made their way south. The forest had an evil reputation. It was nothing short of that, and already, before the turn of the century, it had a history that gave pause even to the most intrepid adventurer. The first record of it was left in the writings of a missionary on his way through that country to come to the aid of a tribe of Indians, reported to the post at Chequamegon Bay in the north, to be starving Father Perigord vanished, but the Indians later brought in his effects: a sandal, his rosary, and a prayer book, to which he had written certain curious words, which have been carefully preserved. I have the conviction that some creature is following me. I thought at first it was a bear, but I am now compelled to believe that it is something incredibly more monstrous than anything on this earth. Darkness is falling, and I believe I have developed a slight delirium, for I persist in hearing strange music and other curious sounds which can surely not derive from any natural source. There is also a disturbing illusion, as of great footsteps which actually shake the earth, and I have several times encountered a very large footprint which varies in shape. Sounds like a psychological experience. The second record is far more sinister. When Big Bob Hiller, one of the most rapturous lumber barons of the entire Midwest, began to encroach upon the Rick Lakes country in the middle of the last century, he could not fail to be impressed by the stand of pine in the area near the lake, and though he did not own it, he followed the usual custom of the lumber barons and sent his men in from adjoining where his line ran. 13 men failed to return from that first day's work on the edge of the forest area surrounding Rick's Lake. 2 of their bodies were never recovered. 4 were found, inconceivably, in the lake, several miles from where they had been cutting timber. The others were discovered at various places in the forest. Hiller thought he had a lumber war on his hands, laid his men off to mislead his unknown opponent, and then he suddenly ordered them back to work in the forbidden region. After he had lost 5 more men, Hiller pulled out, and no hand since his time touched the forest, save for 1 or 2 individuals who took up land there and moved into the area. One and all, these individuals moved out within a short time, saying little but hinting much. Yet the nature of their whispered hints was such that they were soon forced to abandon any explanation. So incredible were the tales they told, with overtones of something too horrible for description. Of age-old evil which preceded anything dreamed of by even the most learned archaeologist. Only one of them vanished, and no trace of him was ever found. The others came back out of the forest, and in the course of time were lost somewhere among other people in the United States, all save a half-breed known as Old Peter, who was obsessed with the idea that there were mineral deposits in the vicinity of the wood, and occasionally went to camp on its edge, being careful not to venture in. It was inevitable that the Rick's Lake legends would ultimately reach the attention of Professor Upton Gardner of the State University. He had completed collections of Paul Bunyan, Whiskey Jack, and Hodog tales, and was engaged upon a compilation of place legends, when he first encountered the curious, half-forgotten tales that emanated from the region of Rick's Lake. I discovered later that his first reaction to them was one of casual interest. Legends abound in out-of-the-way places, but there was nothing to indicate that these were of any more import than others. True, there was no similarity in the strictest sense of the word to the more familiar tales, for while the usual legends concerned themselves with the ghostly appearances of men and animals, lost treasure, tribal beliefs, and the like, those of Rick's Lake were curiously unusual in their instance upon utterly utter creatures, or a creature, since no one had ever reported seeing more than one, even vaguely in the forest darkness, half man, half beast, with always the hint that this description was inadequate, and that it did injustice to the narrator's concept of what it was that lurked there in the vicinity of the lake. Nevertheless, Professor Gardner would in all probability have done little more than add the legends as he heard them to his collection, if it had not been for the reports seemingly unconnected, of two curious facts, and the accidental discovery of a third. Two facts were both newspaper accounts, carried by Wisconsin papers within a week of each other. The first was a terse, half-comic report headed Sea Serpent in Wisconsin Lake, and read, Pilot X Castleton on test flight over northern Wisconsin yesterday reported seeing a large animal of some kind bathing by night in a forest lake in the vicinity of Chequamegon. Castleton was caught in a thunder shower and was flying low at the time, when, in an effort to ascertain his whereabouts, he looked down when lightning flashed, and saw what appeared to be a very large animal rising from the waters of a lake below him, and vanish into the forest. The pilot added no details to his story, but asserts that the creature he saw was not Loch Ness Monster. The second story was the utterly fantastic tale of the discovery of the body of Father Piergard, well preserved in the hollow trunk of a tree along the Brule River, at first called a lost member of the Marquette Joliet expedition. Father Piergard was quickly identified. To this report was appended a frigid statement by the president of the State Historical Society, dismissing the discovery as a hoax. The discovery Professor Gardner made was simply that an old friend was actually the owner of the abandoned lodge and most of the shore of Rick's Lake. The sequence of events was thus clearly inevitable. Professor Gardner instantly associated both newspaper accounts with the Rick's Lake legends. This might not have been enough to stir him to drop his researches into the general mass of legends abounding in Wisconsin for specific research of quite another kind. But the occurrence of something even more astounding sent him post-haste to the owner of the abandoned lodge for permission to take the place over in the interest of science. What spurred him to take this action was nothing less than a request from the curator of the State Museum to visit his office late one night and view a new exhibit which had arrived. He went there in company of Laird Dorgan, and it was Laird who came to me. But that it was after Professor Gardner vanished. For he did vanish. After sporadic reports from Rick's Lake over a period of 3 months, all word from the lodge ceased entirely, and nothing further was heard of Professor Upton Gardner. Laird came to my room in the University Club one night in October. His frank blue eyes were clouded, his lips tense, his brow furrowed, and there was everything to show that he was in a state of moderate excitation, which did not derive from liquor. I assumed that he was working too hard. The first period tests in his University of Wisconsin classes were just over, and Laird habitually took tests seriously. Even as a student, he had done so, and now, as an instructor, he was doubly conscientious. But it was not that. Professor Gardner had been missing almost a month now, and it was this which preyed on his mind. He said as much in so many words, adding, "Jack, I've got to go up there and see what I can do." "Man, if the sheriff and the posse haven't discovered anything, what can you do?" I asked. "For one thing, I don't know more than they do." "As so, why don't you tell them?" "Because it's not the sort of thing they'd pay any attention to. Legends, no." He was looking at me speculatively, as if wondering whether he could trust me. I was suddenly conscious of the conviction that he did know something which he at least regarded with the gravest concern, and at the same time I had the most curious sensation of premonition and warning that I had ever experienced. In that instant, the entire room seemed tense, the air electrified. "If I go up there, do you think you could go along?" "I guess I could manage." "Good." He took a turn or two about the room, his eyes brooding, looking at me from time to time, still betraying uncertainty and an inability to make up his mind. Look, Laird, sit down and take it easy. That caged lion stuff isn't good for your nerves. He took my advice. He sat down, covered his face with his hands, and shuddered. For a moment I was alarmed, but he snapped of it in a few seconds, leaned back, and lit a cigarette. You know those legends about Rick's Lake, Jack. I assured him that I knew them and the history of that place, from the beginning, as much as had been recorded. And those stories in the papers I mentioned to you? The stories, too, I remember them, since Laird had discussed with me their effects on his employer. That second one about Father Pierregard, he began, hesitated and stopped, but then, taking a deep breath, he began again. You know, Gardner and I went over to the curator's office one night last spring. Yes, I was east at the time, of course. Well, we went over there. The curator had something to show us. What do you think it was? No idea. What was it? That body in the tree. No. Gave us quite a jolt. There it was, hollow trunk and all, just the way it had been found. It had been shipped down to the museum for exhibition, but it was never exhibited, of course, for a very good reason. When Gardner saw it, he thought that it was waxwork, but it wasn't. You don't mean that it was the real thing, Laird nodded. I know, it's incredible. It's just not possible. Well, yes, I suppose it's impossible, but it was so, and that's why it wasn't exhibited. Just taken out and buried. I don't quite follow that.